This is part 2 of my analysis of the short story A Thousand Years of Good Prayers by the Chinese-born writer Yiyun Li. We left off at the point where Mr. Shi is at the park with Madam, and he has been pondering on the reasons why his relationship with his daughter is so poor. That evening, Mr. Shi tries once more to get his daughter to open up to him, as he reflects that she is someone he shares a language with, but with whom he can no longer share a dear moment. She, however, remains confrontational, and Mr. Shi lets his exasperation at her unladylike behaviour be known. You know, a woman shouldn't ask such direct questions. A good woman is deferential and knows how to make people talk. His daughter refuses to communicate with him on his terms and challenges him on his having been able to communicate with her mother. Did she succeed in making you talk? His daughter asks, and her eyes looking directly into his are fiercer than he knows. When Mr. Shi, aware that they are venturing onto dangerous territory, retaliates that her mother wouldn't be so confrontational, his daughter's frustrations are clear at the way in which he is trying to dictate the manner in which he feels it is acceptable that they communicate. Baba, first you accused me of being too quiet. I start to talk, and you are saying I'm talking in the wrong way. Mr. Shi counters this with, talking is not only asking questions. Talking is you telling people how you feel about them and inviting them to tell you how they feel about you. Note how Mr. Shi is reluctant to have questions asked that might force him to reveal more than he is comfortable doing. And when he brings the conversation back round to the topic of his daughter's divorce, she once more shuts it down by inquiring, Baba, I didn't ask you before, but how long do you plan to stay in America? Before retreating to her room. Mr. Shi is left feeling frustrated. The uneaten food on the table symbolising the lack of connection between the pair. She does not know the cooking has become his praying, and she leaves the prayers unanswered. Note how on the next day Mr. Shi feels more at ease speaking to Madam in Chinese now. He still, however, maintains the fiction that he was a rocket scientist who was bound by the rules of confidentiality not to speak about his work. So I couldn't talk to my family about what I was thinking about. He is slowly, however, coming to the realisation that truly it was his mistake, never establishing a habit of talking to his daughter, although he persists in the delusion that it was because he had a higher calling, chosen as he was to work for a grand cause. At the dinner table that evening, his daughter reveals that she has researched the Chinese travel agency and will book the tours for him the next day. While he is in the middle of claiming that he would rather stay with her because this is the America I wanted to see, the phone rings. Rather than go into her bedroom and shut the door, his daughter decides to leave it open so that her father can hear, if not understand, her conversation. He listens to her speak English on the phone, her voice shriller than he has ever known it to be. She speaks fast and laughs often. He does not understand her words, but even more, he does not understand her manner. Her voice, too sharp, too loud, too immodest, is so unpleasant to his ears that for a moment he feels as if he had accidentally caught a glimpse of her naked body. A total stranger. Not the daughter he knows. Note the way in which her manner completely changes when she is speaking a different language that doesn't have the same structure and protocols as the native tongue that she finds so stifling. Her naked self is one that Mr. Shi finds as shocking as if she was physically nude in front of him. Mr. Shi's daughter has taken matters into her own hands. Avoiding the issue has not worked, so she has decided that shocking him is the only way. The incident leads on to a frank conversation about how her marriage broke down because of her relationship with an American of European heritage. She quickly shatters her father's illusions about her. Baba, my marriage wasn't what you thought. I wasn't abandoned. A great weight appears lifted from her shoulders as Mr. She sees that her eyes are candid with resolve and relief. The floodgates have been opened, and once she starts talking, he cannot stop her. She explains to him that our problem was I never talked enough for my husband. He always suspected that I was hiding something from him because I was quiet, and that the more he asked me to talk, the more I wanted to be quiet and alone. I'm not good at talking, as you've pointed out. Note how she has also displayed the same pattern of behaviour with her father, as history repeats itself. Mrs. She finds her claims that she is not good at talking difficult to believe, as he has just witnessed the opposite. But that's a lie. You just talked over the phone with such immodesty. You laughed like a prostitute. His daughter explains that it's different, Baba. We talk in English and it's easier. I don't talk well in Chinese. Baba, if you grew up in a language that you never used to express your feelings, it would be easier to take up another language and talk more in the new language. It makes you a new person. For her, her language and her identity are so deeply intertwined that she can't separate the two. She can't be the person that she wants to be in Chinese because she feels that the language has been an instrument of oppression. It's ironic that Mr. She cannot or will not understand what she means and takes her comment as a personal insult. Are you blaming your mother and me for your adultery? When he has had personal experience of the freedom that the English language gives and the way that it has enabled him to effortlessly reinvent himself as a retired rocket scientist. Mr. She's daughter switches the focus of the conversation away from her own relationship onto the problems in Mr. She's marriage. You never talked, and Mama never talked, when you both knew there was a problem in your marriage. I learned not to talk. Mr. She stubbornly refuses to engage with his daughter on the topic of the problems in his marriage, and resolutely sticks to his story that he was preoccupied with his work and that he was quiet because of his profession. His daughter is forced to call him out as a liar and to reveal the truth that both she and her mother had to live with for years. Baba, Mr. She's daughter said, pity in her eyes, you know it's a lie too. You were never a rocket scientist. Mama knew. I knew. Everybody knew. And she goes on to explain that even though you never talked about what you did at work, other people, they talked about you. Mr. She is initially speechless as he tries to find some words to defend himself, but he quickly regains his composure as he has, for all his life, remained calm about disasters. And he acknowledges that she is speaking the truth. Both know that, although this honesty has brought about a level of understanding between the pair, it, rather than bring them closer, has just plainly articulated the emotional gulf that lies between them, and that this will not be bridged, whether he remains in America or not. The conversation ends with his daughter saying, quietly behind him, Baba, I'll book the tours for you tomorrow. The final scene in the novel takes place in the park, as Mr. She prepares to say goodbye to Madam. Note that there is no further communication or goodbye scene between father and daughter. Everything that has needed to be said has been said, and Mr. She is returning to China without argument. He has decided to take this opportunity to clarify all the lies he has told about himself. It is significant that he chooses to do this with Madam, who understands him on an emotional rather than a linguistic level, rather than with his daughter, who understands him on a linguistic but not an emotional level, as he prepares himself to be honest with himself for the first and perhaps the last time in his life. He rehearses in his mind what he will say to Madam, that it was hard for a young man to remain quiet about his work. A young rocket scientist, such pride and glory, you just wanted to share the excitement with someone. This someone was the young female card puncher, or the person who entered computer programming data in the technology's early days, who worked for him. Note the significance of his naming her. Name is Yilan. She is the only character in the story, other than Mr. She, who is given a name, which not only gives her an identity, but is also an indication of the emotional connection and sense of equality that he felt with her. When Madame arrives, Mr. Shi announces that he has something to tell her and says in English, "I was not a rocket scientist." And he goes on to explain in Chinese that "I was not a rocket scientist because of a woman. The only thing we did was talk." Nothing wrong with talking, you would imagine. But no, talking between a married man and an unmarried girl was not accepted. That's how sad our time was back then. He remembers how addictive it was to talk about their shared hope and excitement in the grand history they were taking part in, of building the first rocket for their young communist mother. And explains that once you started talking, you talked more and more. It was different than going home and talking to your wife, because you didn't have to hide anything. We talked about our own lives, of course. Talking is like riding with an unreined horse. You don't know where you end up, and you don't have to think about it. That's what our talking was like, but we weren't having an affair, as they said. We were never in love. This assertion, however, confuses Mr. Shi, as, in light of his conversation with his daughter the previous night, he considers the possibility that, even though there was never any physical contact between them, they may have been in love on a purely emotional level because of the way they were able to communicate with one another in an uninhibited manner. This revelation makes him uncomfortable, as he is able to see the parallel between this relationship and his daughter's with the American. Wasn't it how his daughter ended her marriage because of all the talking with another man? Mr. Shi shifts on his bench and starts to sweat, despite the cool breeze of October. We find out that Mr. Shi sacrificed his position as a rocket scientist because he refused to publicly admit the affair, instead choosing a post as a lowly office worker. Not only do we see that Mr. Shi was a proud man who was adamant that he had done nothing wrong, but also that he thought, erroneously as it happens, that he was shielding his wife from the knowledge of his behaviour. Instead, he chose to maintain his dignity at work and went home to his wife as a preoccupied and silent rocket scientist. He looked away from the questions in his wife's eyes until the questions disappeared one day. It's sad and ironic that what he assumed to be his daughter growing up as quiet and understanding as his wife was actually her closing herself off in resentful silence. The story ends with him pondering on the only decision he feels he could have made under the circumstances, and finding comfort in the mantra that was often repeated in their training and is therefore deeply ingrained in him, that it's what we sacrifice that makes life meaningful. This is a very poignant conclusion for him to come to, because for his daughter, it is the human connections and relationships that we build through communication that give life meaning, and that she has only been able to find coming to another country and speaking a different language. Unable to materially change his fractured relationship with his daughter, now that he has admitted to his big lie, he has reframed his past so that he can live with it, because there is nothing else he can do. Coming to America has, albeit temporarily, given him a fresh perspective with which he is not entirely comfortable. A foreign country gives one foreign thoughts, he thinks. For an old man like him, it is not healthy to ponder too much over memory, and he firmly replaces the lid on Pandora's box. The story's final lines leave him taking pleasure from the present moment, with Madam, a dear friend, sitting next to him, holding up a perfect golden ginkgo leaf to the sunshine for him to see. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to answer them. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos on English language topics and exam techniques and English literature texts.